You're watching MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23, a free educational service provided by Circle City Broadcasting of Indianapolis. Here's what's coming up this hour. Get more information, special announcements, and weekly program schedules online at wishtv.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook. Here's what's coming up next.
Welcome back, 4th graders, to Knowledge on the Go, Wit and Wisdom's virtual learning experience. As you know, my name is Stacy Fitzwater, and I am one of your teachers for our Grade 4, Module 4. Before we get started today, pause and take a moment to remind yourself of our learning expectations. I'm excited to jump into Lesson 4 with you today. In the last lesson, you may recall that we supported ideas with factual details from our text. We also determined the context that we needed in order to explain the Greek myths we read. Today, in order to be successful, we will need to read from our text, Gifts from the Gods. If you don't have your own copy, don't worry, you'll be able to read along with me. We'll also be using handout 4A, our journals, and of course, you'll need a pencil. In order to get our handouts, you can find them in the Lesson Resources section in Student Downloads beneath the lesson video. If your school uses Wit and Wisdom, you may have a Student Edition workbook. You can also find handouts in there. To start our work today, we are going to read the myth Victory from our text, Gifts from the Gods. As always, if you don't have the text, you can read along with me. Before we read, let's create a Read, Think, Wonder chart in our journals. We'll need to add details to it as we read the myth Victory. So turn to the next clean page in the front of your journal and make a chart like the one you see here. We've made a lot of charts already in our lessons together, so I recommend titling this one Victory, just like I did. Pause the video now to give yourself time to create your chart in your journal now. As we read, pause the video whenever you notice something that makes you think. Write that text in your Read column and write what it makes you think in the Think column. Then you can write any questions you wonder in the Wonder column. You can pause the video as many times as you like so that you can complete your chart while we read. We'll be returning to these pages in your journal and look at your notes later in the lesson. If you're following along, we'll start reading on page 79. Victory. Defeat of an enemy or opponent. Triumph. He really didn't see the problem. He was accustomed to victory after victory, and the idea of defeat never occurred to him. By John Flanagan, from The Battle for Scandia. Even though the goddess Victoria was tiny, her power was immense. Victoria always accompanied Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and war, and she was so little that she could fit into Minerva's hand. Sometimes, when Minerva was on her way to a battle, she would scoop up Victoria in her hand and carry her. But most of the time, the little goddess sped along by herself, her wings beating so fast that they were nearly invisible. As soon as she reached a battleground, Victoria set to work. First, she flew to one side and listened in on the conversations of the generals and the soldiers. Then she hastened to the other side to hear their talk and reasons for war. Only when she fully understood who fought for a fair and just cause did she act. Then she quickly dove down and guided the horses and the spears of the men she championed, making sure they won. Sometimes other gods and goddesses would become involved in war by helping their favorite heroes. They didn't care who was fighting for a just cause, so if Victoria was absent, it was impossible to be certain which side would win. Only when Victoria was present at the battle would the righteous side be sure to triumph. If Victoria was with them, the soldiers could always feel it. Their bodies grew stronger, their thinking became sharper, and their strategy improved. With her help, a small army could conquer a larger one. Upon returning from war, the triumphant generals and warriors always offered thanksgiving and sacrifices to tiny Victoria. And so, in time, her name became synonymous with winning, and not just on the battlefield, but in every kind of competition. Victoria is the Roman name for the Greek goddess Nike, and Minerva is what they called the Greek goddess Athena. The Greeks loved these two goddesses so much that they named their capital city, Athens, after Athena, and placed statues of Nike all along the city walls to ensure their triumph in every battle and contest. Did you take good notes as we were reading? Remember, you can always pause the video or even go back and replay listening to the text so that you can have time to add notes to your chart. Your detective skills and good note-taking will help us create good questions. These questions can drive our investigation into the mystery of the myth victory. I'm curious about what notes you added to your chart. I'll share some of my notes with you, but remember, your notes don't have to look like mine. As long as your ideas come from what you read in the text, you're right on track. You can pause the video at any time if you'd like to add any of my notes to your chart. First, as we read, I noticed that not only was Victoria the goddess of war and wisdom, but she was tiny and traveled in Minerva's hand. She could also fly. So I added these details to my read column. These details made me think that she was small but still powerful. I added this to the think column. All of these details made me wonder, how did she guide the horses and spears in battle? I added this question to the wonder column. Pause the video if you'd like to make any changes to your chart. You can resume the video when you're ready to move on. As we continued to read, I noticed that Victoria listened to each side, and she helped the just. This made me think that Victoria cared about fighting for the right cause. And so I wondered, how did Victoria learn about justice or right from wrong? I added these additional details to my chart in blue. Pause the video now if you would like to add any details to your chart. Based on what we've read, what do you think the word victory means? Share your definition aloud with me now. Great thinking! I heard some great definitions. I heard someone say, victory means winning something. I also heard someone say that victory means defeating your enemy or the person you are competing against. As we continue to investigate our essential question, what we can learn from myths and stories, we will use our focusing question to uncover the mystery of myths like victory. We will explore why it was created by the Greeks. In a previous lesson, we read the myth Pandora's Box, and we examined how it connected to the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. In today's lesson, we will examine the myth victory, so we can develop a deeper understanding of the characteristics of myths and what those myths tell us about the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. Now, we will need to look for evidence from the text to identify the mystery that the myth victory explains. Turn to the next clean page in your journal and title the new page Myth Analyzer Victory, just like I did here. If you have a student edition workbook or you've downloaded the handout, you can also find this on handout 4A. We will be answering 4 questions in order to collect evidence about the myth. Pause the video now if you need to prepare your journal or get ready with your handout. Resume the video when you're ready to move on. First, let's answer question number 1. Pause the video if you need to write this in your journal. What is happening? Take a moment to reflect on what we read for the myth victory. Pause the video now and write down what you remember happening in the myth. Resume the video when you have finished writing. Let's see if we agree on the key details of what happened in the myth victory. First, we read that Victoria always went with Minerva into battle. We also read that the goddess Victoria helps soldiers in the battle win. Third, we saw that she listens to both sides and she helped the side who was fighting for justice. Pause the video now if you need to add any of these details to your journal or your handout. Let's move on to our second question. What mystery does this myth solve? Pause the video so that you can write your ideas to answer this question. Let's share our ideas. I noticed that the myth of victory explains how different groups of soldiers won different battles. We also read that the ancient Greeks believed that Victoria was the one helping them win. Third, we saw that they felt confident and stronger when they were fighting because of Victoria. Pause the video now if you need time to add details to your chart. I'll move out of the way to make sure you can see all of our notes. Time for question 3. What are the themes in the myth victory? Let's remind ourselves what theme is. Remember that theme is a lesson or a moral of the story. It's something we can learn that applies to our daily lives. Pause the video so that you can write what you think the lesson or moral of the myth victory is. Resume when you are ready to share your ideas. What lessons did you come up with? I saw that Victoria always fought for the side that was just. So that teaches us that justice, the side fighting for the right cause, wins. She reinforces that doing the right thing earns you a reward, like winning a battle or a war. Pause the video now if you want to add any of my theme ideas to your notes. Let's think about what we learned from this myth and other myths. Do you think the myth victory is a creation myth or a morality myth? Share your thoughts aloud with me now. Why did you choose a morality or creation myth? Excellent thinking. So this is a morality myth because morality myths explain how people should behave. If people were fighting for a good, just cause, they would be rewarded with help from Victoria and win their battle. Fighting for justice will be rewarded. This is teaching people how to behave and how to choose the right thing. This brings us to our fourth question. Where do we see aspects of the myth victory today? Think about what evidence the text provides us to make this connection. Pause the video and answer this question now. Let's share our ideas. We read that if a person or team wins any competition, it's called a victory. We also read that the Nike shoe company is named after the goddess Victoria. In Greek, she is referred to as Nike. We also learned that statues of Victoria were placed along city walls. Were you surprised about any of these connections to the myth of victory? What new fact could you share with a friend the next time you hear about a competition or see someone wearing Nike shoes? Pause the video now if you need to add additional notes to your journal or handout. Let's reflect on what the myth victory revealed about the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. Pause the video and write your answer to this question at the bottom of the notes we just recorded together. What does a deeper exploration of myths reveal about... Hello, fourth graders. Welcome back to Knowledge on the Go Wit and Wisdom Virtual Learning Experience. I'm Stacy Fitzwater, and I am one of the teachers who will be working with you through our Grade 4, Module 4. Before we get started, pause and remind yourself of the expectations for our online learning together. Let's get started. If you recall, in our last lesson, we summarized a new Greek myth, victory. We also identified the myth's theme and its reference in modern society. Today, we'll be jumping into part 2 of lesson 4. We'll be using 2 handouts from our previous lessons. Remember, if you don't have the handouts, we used our journal to create a chart. So that means you will need your journal and a pencil. Now that we have read and solved the mysteries of a few different myths, you are ready to find the evidence in the text to prepare to answer our focusing question. In today's lesson, we will focus on our writing craft. We will use our evidence organizer to prepare to answer focusing question task 1. Remember, effective writers incorporate strong evidence. We need to make our points to readers more effectively. A few lessons ago, we compared example paragraphs, and we examined them to determine which included the strongest evidence. Do you remember which one we said was stronger? That's right, paragraph 2. We said the second paragraph was stronger. Do you remember why? I'm hearing some good ideas. That's right, the second paragraph contained specific, clear details to focus and support our statement. The best evidence is detailed, and it makes it easy for the reader to understand. We agreed that the second paragraph had the strongest evidence. So, how do we decide what the strongest evidence is in our own writing? Let's take a look. If you have it, take out handout 3B from an earlier lesson. Otherwise, you can turn to your journal page where we created this evidence organizer. Pause the video if you need time to get your handout or turn to the correct page in your journal now. This organizer is our tool for organizing strong evidence so that you can write a response to the focusing question task and to answer the question, what are myths and why do people create them? This will guide all of our work today. Let's start by looking at the last column, the elaboration section in your evidence organizer. I've pointed it out with arrows here. When I'm filling out the elaboration section of my evidence organizer, I want to be thinking about what the evidence means or how it helps me explain my focusing statement. First, in order to explain the focusing statement, we need to find evidence that connects to each context. Remember that our 4 contexts are on the left-hand column of your chart. I've zoomed in on them here. We decided that number 1, myths include gods and goddesses. 2, they include heroes and monsters. 3, creation myths tell how the world came to be. And 4, morality myths taught people how to behave. We also need to choose the strongest evidence to support our focus statement so that our readers understand our answer to the focusing question. Finally, we will know it's the strongest evidence when we can elaborate on it with a good explanation. Let's get ready to complete the elaboration column of the evidence organizer. You can ask yourself questions as you're thinking about how to elaborate on the evidence that you have already recorded. Think, how does this evidence help me answer the focusing question? Why is this evidence important? What does the reader need to know in order to understand the connection between the question and my evidence? Remember that explaining your evidence will prepare you to write a paragraph about it. It's a good way to know if the evidence that we're including is strong evidence. If it isn't, we might not have that much to say about it in a whole paragraph. So it helps us organize our thinking before we begin to write that paragraph. We can make sure that we have the most important and the strongest evidence. Pause the video now and add elaboration to your chart using your notes as well as details from the myth we read in our last lesson, victory. Pause the video now and resume it when you are ready to move on. How did you do? Did you complete your evidence organizer with elaboration? Remember, you can always pause videos and go back and replay if you need more ideas or to hear the directions again. Between now and our next lesson together, don't forget to keep practicing your fluency. You should read that passage 3 to 5 times out loud each day. Be sure to read accurately with a fluent and expressive voice. In our next lesson together, we will summarize a new Greek myth and explain how its theme is referenced in our modern society. As always, if you have questions or need support, you can contact us at info@greatminds.org. I've so enjoyed working with you today. Thank you for your great work. Take care, and I look forward to our next lesson together.
Look around. Listen. We're moving to a new beat. A colorful symphony, each note made more beautiful by the next. We are driven by talent in the classroom, in each school, that recognizes the potential in every student and knows the opportunity to achieve is not an option, it's expected. We are not alone. We stand among giants, eager to help, eager to give back and build bonds to last generations. We are part of a city fueled by grit, strength, and determination. Racing toward a future full of potential, where hard work really does pay off. When one succeeds, we all succeed. We're innovative. We're industrious. We're imaginative. We are your Indianapolis Public Schools, and we're stronger together.
I think I need to call in sick.
Why? What's wrong?
My throat is sore, dizzy, runny nose.
It sounds like nasopharyngitis.
More than a dozen surprisingly specialized education models to choose from. Explore them all online. Yeah, that's IPS.
Hi, I'm Alicia Johnson. We all know the importance of keeping students engaged in learning during this unprecedented time. In addition to receiving IPS home learning packets, it's crucial for students to see and hear from the teachers they know and love. Through our partnership with Circle City Broadcasting, IPS teachers in grades K through 8 cover everything from reading to math in weekly lessons on MyINDY-TV. Together, we are making education accessible for everyone. For the schedule, visit wishtv.com/IPS.
Because of you, I felt hopeless.
I know it was a joke, but it still hurt me.
Because of you, I felt wanted and not alone in this world.
Because you said hi to me on the first day of school, I felt included and I knew that I was going to be okay.
You can achieve a lot using your imagination. I mean, I don't like to brag, but... Wait, who's that? And why is she all over these achievement awards? But with STEM, the sky's the limit. Shaboom! Use STEM to envision... Okay, I'm seeing it. Yeah! Invent...
Got any ideas?
I've got a few, actually. And create a better world.
Told you she's super smart.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
Our hearts are made stronger by how we treat others.
Put her there.
The light you share can impact those around you, but so can the darkness.
Later, twerps. Did Pete saying mean things bother you?
So when you reach out to another person, take a moment to consider how they will feel and let your heart be the key to making a difference. Because of you, someone's entire day, year, or even life can change.
In every heart, there's hope.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Hello, and welcome back to Knowledge on the Go Wit and Wisdom Virtual Lessons. As you know, my name is Mary Lou Lopez, and I'm one of your teachers for this virtual lesson experience. Today, I'm excited to continue our learning with Part 1, Lesson 4 of Grade 5, Module 4, Breaking Barriers. In the last lesson, we read the rest of the short story, Raymond's Run, and learned how Squeaky's perspective changes toward her brother Raymond and her rival Gretchen by the end of the May Day race. We gathered evidence to support the change in perspective of Squeaky in your preparation for the first module assessment. Focusing question, Task 1. Which you will be completing in Part 2 of this lesson. Before we get started, let's make sure we have all the materials you need. For this lesson, you will need a pencil or something to write with, your journal, and handout 2B, Raymond's Run. Remember, you can always access Handout 2B, which has a copy of our text, Raymond's Run, under the Student Downloads, beneath the lessons video on the Knowledge on the Go page on Great Minds website. If you don't have access to the handout, don't worry. That's okay. I will read aloud part of the story during our lesson, and you can replay it as needed. Go ahead and pause the video now if you need to get any materials and get yourself organized for learning. In our first learning arc, we have been thinking deeply about how sports have the power to affect the way we view others. In part 2 of lesson 4, the final lesson in this first arc, you will have a chance to demonstrate what you've learned by completing focusing task question 1. Remember that all of our lessons have a content framing question that provides the lens for our study in the text of our lesson. In the previous reveal lesson, we zoomed out to look closely at Squeaky's views of other characters and how her perspective has changed in the story. In this lesson, we are going to zoom in, and we will distill the essential meaning of Raymond's Run and consider how the text and its learning arc, Raymond's Run, and the Nelson Mandela documentary from lesson 1 build our knowledge about the power of sports. Let's get started. Take a moment to read out loud these definitions of theme. Listen as I read the definitions out loud. 1. The central message of a literary work. 2. An idea developed in a text that conveys a message or truth about life and the human experience. Great stories contain deeper meanings and messages that apply not just to the story's characters, but to readers as well. When we think about themes in the stories we read, reading becomes a richer experience and can reveal important ideas and truths. Remember to turn to the vocabulary page in your journal, pause the screen, and record the definition of theme. In part 1 of this lesson, we will think about themes in Raymond's Run. Remember, we can often find clues to a story's theme by paying close attention to what the main characters learn or how they change by the end of the story. You've already done a lot of great thinking in the previous lesson about how Squeaky's views change by the end of Raymond's Run. Let's reread the final scene of Raymond's Run to jog our thinking about Squeaky's perspective change and how it offers clues to the story's theme. If you have handout 2B, turn to it now. Go ahead and reread paragraphs 24 and 25. Be sure to read with expression in a way that captures Squeaky's voice and personality. If you do not have handout 2B, don't worry. You can follow along as I read aloud the final 2 paragraphs. Whether you're reading independently or listening, consider these questions. In what way has Squeaky changed by the end of the story, especially in the way she views herself and others? What evidence best captures this change? So as you read or listen to me read, keep these 2 questions in mind. Paragraph 24 of Raymond's Run. In first place, the man on the loudspeaker is clear as a bell now, but then he pauses, and the loudspeaker starts to whine, then static, and I lean down to catch my breath, and here comes Gretchen, walking back, for she overshot the finish line too. huffing and puffing with her hands on her hips, taking it slow, breathing in steady time like a real pro, and I sort of like her a little for the first time. In first place! And then 3 or 4 voices get all mixed up on the loudspeaker, and I dig my sneaker into the grass and stare at Gretchen, who's staring back. We both wondering just who did win. I can hear old Beanstalk arguing with the man on the loudspeaker, and then a few others running their mouths about what the stopwatches say. Then I hear Raymond yanking at the fence to call me, and I wave to shush him. But he keeps rattling the fence like a gorilla in a cage, like in them gorilla movies. But then like a dancer or something, he starts climbing up nice and easy, but very fast. And it occurs to me, watching how smoothly he climbs hand over hand, and remembering how he looked running with his arms down to his side, and with the wind pulling his mouth back and his teeth showing, and all, it occurred to me that Raymond would make a very fine runner. Doesn't he always keep up with me on my trots? And he surely knows how to breathe in counts of 7, 'cause he's always doing it at the dinner table, which drives my brother George up the wall. And I'm smiling to beat the band, 'cause if I've lost this race, or if me and Gretchen tied, or even if I've won, I can always retire as a runner and begin a whole new career as a coach with Raymond as my champion. After all, with a little more study, I can beat Cynthia and her phony self at the spelling bee. And if I bugged my mother, I could get piano lessons and become a star. And I have a big rep as the baddest thing around. And I've got a room full of ribbons and medals and awards. But what has Raymond got to call his own? So I stand there with my new plans, laughing out loud by this time as Raymond jumps down from the fence and runs over with his teeth showing and his arms down to the side, which no one before him has quite mastered as a running style. And by the time he comes over, I'm jumping up and down, so glad to see him. My brother Raymond, a great runner in the family tradition. But of course, everyone thinks I'm jumping up and down because the men on the loudspeaker have finally gotten themselves together and compared notes and are announcing, "In first place, Miss Hazel Elizabeth Deborah Parker." Dig that! In second place, Miss Gretchen P. Lewis. And I look over at Gretchen, wondering what the P stands for. And I smile. 'Cause she's good, no doubt about it. Maybe she'd like to help me coach Raymond. She obviously is serious about running, as any fool can see, and she nods to congratulate me. And then she smiles, and I smile. We stand there with this big smile of respect between us. It's about as real a smile as girls can do for each other, considering we don't practice real smiling every day, 'cause maybe we too busy being flowers or fairies or strawberries instead of something honest and worthy of respect, like being people. I'm curious what lines may have stood out to you during this reading. To me, some of the lines that I saw was that he starts climbing up nice and easy, but very fast. As well as it occurs to me, watching how smoothly he climbs, hand over hand, and remembering how he looked running with his arms down to his side. How does this piece here stand out to you? about Raymond. Also, that stood out to me was when Gretchen smiles and Squeaky Miles smiles back. What does this evidence show us about how Squeaky has changed and what she has learned about herself and others? Now that we've reread the end of the story and reflected on the ways in which Squeaky has changed, especially in a way she views others, we will think about how those ideas connect to broader themes or messages in Raymond's Run. Specifically, we will think about what Raymond's Run teaches us about the power of sports. Turn to a new blank page in your journal and write this question down in the center of the page and draw a box or circle around it. Take a moment to set up your page. In a moment, I'll ask you to pause the video and reflect on this question. What does Raymond's Run teach us about the power of sports? Jot down themes, draw lines off the center of the box, and create a separate circle, box, or circle for each of your ideas. I'll model one example to help you get started. I've been thinking about how running brings both Squeaky and Raymond and Squeaky and Gretchen together in this story. I think Squeaky is surprised by the connection she feels to both Raymond and Gretchen after the race. Running is like a bridge that leads Squeaky to a new understanding and connection with both of them. One theme I might record is sports can bring people together in an unexpected way. Remember, there is never just a single theme in a story. This is just one idea I had. What else does Raymond's Run teach us about the power of sports? Be sure you can point to evidence in the story to support your themes. If you get stuck, think back to what you noticed about how Squeaky changes in the story and what she learns about herself and others. Feel free to use the evidence organizer you created in your journal in Lesson 3 to help you articulate your theme. Go ahead and pause the video to reflect on broader themes in Raymond's Run. I'm sure you came up with some strong themes. Be sure to check your work, pause the video, reread the themes you wrote down, and ask yourself, what evidence from the text supports each theme? Now I'll share with you a few themes I thought of. Remember, I'm only sharing to generate discussion and give you an opportunity to compare your themes with someone else's, so you can think about whether you were thorough and based your themes on text evidence. Another theme I thought about is how people can find common ground through sports. At the beginning of the story, I think Squeaky sees more differences than similarities between herself and Gretchen. By the end of the race, Squeaky realizes that they share a love and talent for running. The smile between Squeaky and Gretchen represents common ground that they find in running. What other themes did you come up with? What is the most important theme or message you will take away from Raymond's Run? Look back in your journal at your evidence organizer for Lesson 3 and the themes you generated in today's lesson. Then pause the video and take 2 or 3 minutes to complete a quick write in response to this question. What is the most important theme or message you will take away from Raymond's run? Remember, when we do a quick write, we write a brief response to reflect on and express our ideas. Don't worry about spelling or other conventions. Just focus on getting your ideas down. I wish we could share our thoughts about this question together in person. If you have a friend or family member, I encourage you to share with them the big ideas and themes you learned from reading Raymond's Run. To wrap up part 1, let's reflect on how the texts we've read so far, Raymond's Run by Tony Cade Bambara and Nelson Mandela documentary from Lesson 1, build our knowledge about the power of sports. As you may recall, in Lesson 1, we listened to a clip from the speech that Nelson Mandela, a former president of South Africa, delivered at the 2000 Laureus World Sports Award, a ceremony held each year to celebrate important achievements in sports around the world. Let's listen to his words again as we reflect on what we've learned.
Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair.
What did you learn from watching the documentary about Nelson Mandela and South Africa's 1995 Rugby World Cup victory in Lesson 1? Take a moment to pause and think, what does that documentary teach us about the power of sports? Now take a minute to think about what you've learned over the last several lessons. Look through your journal at all the ideas and evidence you've recorded and the writing you have done. What knowledge of the world did you develop? What ideas did you ponder or think about? On a fresh page of your journal, write Knowledge Journal Entry, just as you did in the welcome module. Pause the video and take 4 to 5 minutes to respond to this prompt. How do the documentary about Nelson Mandela and the short story Raymond's Run build your knowledge about the power of sports, especially to help us see others in new ways? If possible, share some of your learning with a friend or family member. When we meet again for part 2 of this lesson, you will have a chance to review and strengthen evidence you've gathered of how Squeaky's views of Raymond and Gretchen change in the story. Then you will write a response to focusing question task 1. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at info@greatminds.org. It was fun learning with you. Take care and see you next time. Hello. Hello, and welcome back to Knowledge on the Go Wit and Wisdom Virtual Lessons. As you remember, my name is Mary Lou Lopez, and I'm one of your teachers for this virtual lesson experience. Today, I'm so excited to be learning with Part 2 of Lesson 4, Grade 5, Module 4, Breaking Barriers. As you recall, in Part 1 of this lesson, we reflected on how Squeaky changed by the end of Raymond's run, especially in her views of herself and others. We connected those ideas to broader themes or messages in the story, and articulated themes related to the power of sports. We also reflected on how the text in this learning arc built our knowledge about the power of sports, especially to affect the way we view others. Before we get started, let's make sure we have all the materials we'll need to learn. For this lesson, you will need a pencil or something to write with, your journal, Assessment 4B Focusing Question Task 1, Handout 2B Raymond's Run, and Handout 2C, Fluency. Remember, you can access lesson handouts and assessment resources under Student Downloads beneath the lesson videos on the Knowledge on the Go page on the Great Minds website. If you don't have access to the handouts, that's okay. We will review the assessment task together during the lesson. Go ahead and pause the video now if you need to get any materials or need time to get organized for learning. In our focusing question arc, we have been exploring the question, how can sports affect the way we view others? In this final lesson, our first learning arc, you will have a chance to demonstrate your learning by completing Focusing Question Task 1. Let's take a look at Focusing Question Task 1 together to make sure you understand what it asks you to do. If you have a copy of Assessment 4A available in the Student Downloads, you can review the task on that handout. If not, don't worry, we'll review it together. Follow along with me as I read aloud the introduction. Nelson Mandela once said that sport has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. In the short story, Raymond's Run, how does Squeaky's perspective toward her rival Gretchen or her brother Raymond change after the race? How does she come to understand Gretchen or Raymond in a new way as a result of running this race? Now take a moment to silently read the task. Pause and think. In your own words, what is the task asking you to do? Let's review it together. For this task, you will choose either Gretchen or Raymond. Write a paragraph to explain how Squeaky's perspective changes towards this character by the end of the race, and how she comes to understand this character in a new way as a result of the race. Support your ideas with evidence from Raymond's Run. How do you think writing about Squeaky's perspective change will deepen your understanding of the power of sports? In Lesson 3, we gathered evidence of Squeaky's view of Raymond and Gretchen at the beginning of the story, as well as at the end. You elaborated on each piece of evidence to explain how it shows Squeaky's views. At the end of Lesson 3, you had a chance to review your evidence and choose whether to write about how Squeaky views of Raymond or Gretchen changes. You put a star next to the evidence organizer for that character. Then, I want you to turn to this evidence organizer now in your journal. Before you begin writing, it is important to make sure you have the evidence you need and that you've thought through what it means. Take a few minutes now to review your evidence organizer with these questions in mind. Have you recorded 1 to 2 pieces of strong evidence to show Squeaky's views of your character before and after the race? Have you elaborated on each piece of evidence to explain its significance? Pause the video and take a few minutes to review your notes and add any new ideas you gain through our work with theme. If needed, you can reread parts of the story on Handout 2B or replay the read out louds in the videos from Lesson 3. Now, it's time to create a response to your focusing question Task 1. Let's review the success criteria before you get started. Be sure that your paragraph opens with a topic statement that explains how Squeaky's perspective towards Raymond or Gretchen changes by the end of the race. Develop your topic statement with relevant evidence from Raymond's run that shows Squeaky's perspective before and after the race. Be sure your paragraph includes elaboration to explain how the evidence shows Squeaky's new understanding of the character as a result of the race, and closes with a concluding statement that reinforces your main idea. Go ahead and pause the video and create your response to focusing question Task 1. Take as much time as you need. Use your evidence organizer and any other notes to help you develop your ideas. After you complete the task, check your work using the success criteria on this slide. The criteria are also listed at the bottom of Assessment 4A handout. Restart the lesson video once you've completed focusing question Task 1. Review your response and check your work for these success criteria. Good luck. For homework, I invite you to complete the fluency practice on Handout 2C. You can find the link for this handout under the lesson videos in the student downloads. This is a great opportunity for you to practice your reading fluency and to have fun bringing Squeaky's character to life with your own voice. Congratulations on completing the first learning arc of Module 4. In the next lessons, you will begin exploring a new focusing question. How can sports create opportunities for change? In this learning arc, you are going to read We Are the Ship by Kadir Nelson, which tells the story of the Negro Leagues and all those who made it possible for Jackie Robinson to integrate into the major leagues and end decades of segregation in baseball. You will also learn about the role of research in writing about a topic by looking at how Kadir Nelson used research in his book. Later in the module, you will conduct your own research on a topic related to breaking barriers and the power of sports. Contact us at info@greatminds.org if you have any questions or need support. Thank you for learning together today and in the last few lessons. Take care.
You're watching MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23, a free educational service provided by Circle City Broadcasting of Indianapolis. Here's what's coming up this hour. Get more information, special announcements, and weekly program schedules online at wishtv.com. And be sure to follow us on Facebook. Here's what's coming up next.
Hello, 6th graders, and welcome back. My name is Mrs. Day, and I'm excited to continue where we left off last time with Endurance and her crew. We were so busy in our last lesson. We closely read photographs in chapters 2 and 3 and summarized the main ideas of those chapters. Today, we are going to continue with chapters 4 and 5 and get to see how the situation is becoming increasingly more dangerous for Shackleton and his crew. If you have not had the opportunity yet to read or listen to chapters 4 and 5, I'm going to suggest that you pause the video here and go do that before continuing on with this lesson. Let's start our welcome today by looking at and reading the caption of this photograph. The sea is frozen into an impenetrable barrier of crushed floes. When Hurley encountered the pack ice that we can see here, he wrote in his diary, "It is now 7 weeks since we first entered the pack ice, and since then it has been almost an incessant battle." Take a look at that word, incessant. Hurley describes the ship in the ice as being an incessant battle. And what do you think that might mean? I'm going to have you write that bolded word into your journal as a vocabulary word. And I want you to take a minute to think about what incessant might mean and hang on to that idea. We're going to come back to looking at that as well as a few other important vocabulary words for this section. Let's go over the material you're going to need for this lesson. You will need Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World, a journal, a pen or pencil, handout 2B for fluency homework, and handout 3A for art vocabulary that we're going to use again today. And as always, you can find handouts and other lesson resources under student downloads beneath the lesson videos. This slide should look very familiar to you by now. I want you to read the essential question out loud with me today, right up here. Ready? How can the challenges of a hostile environment inspire heroism? We are going to be thinking a lot about a response to that question in our work today. We've been really honing our ability to study photographs in the last few lessons, and we're going to continue that practice today as we think about our focusing question. Read this one with me too. How do Shackleton and his crew respond to the hostile environment of Antarctica? As we think about that, we're really going to begin to analyze the setting in selected photographs today and the crew's responses to that harsh environment. In the past few lessons, we have wondered, organized, and today we will begin the reveal stage. What does a deeper exploration of the hostile environment of Antarctica reveal in Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World? In this lesson, we will explore how the text and photographs depict Antarctica as a hostile environment and examine the crew's initial responses to their bad luck of getting trapped in the ice. The text, the photographs, and the use of vocabulary words and phrases really help Armstrong depict the hostile environment of the Endurance and the dangers that the crew were facing. So we're going to take this time to skim through parts of chapter 4, and we're going to talk about how the text and photographs work together in order to depict Antarctica. So, while we look through these, also think about how is Antarctica both dangerous and mysterious? There is a lot going on right now. So, chapter 4 is titled The Fist of the Atlantic. And I'm not going to read the full chapter to you, but I want to read a few highlights. Outside, the ocean teemed with life. Humpbacks and killer whales spouted in the distance, and the water was dotted with ice floes on which fat, blinking seals basked in the sun. Emperor penguins bowed formally to the ship and crew as they passed. It's pretty crazy, all the animals that they're encountering. McNeish remarked that the penguins were particularly attracted to the banjo music. So that must have been pretty fun to play the banjo and watch the penguins respond to that. The animals on board provided entertainment too. Mrs. Chippy, who, despite his name, was actually a tomcat, discovered that he could stroll along the tops of the dog kennels just out of reach of the snapping jaws. Oh, Mrs. Chippy. Sounds like he was tormenting the poor dogs. Occasionally, when the frigid atmosphere was charged with water, every rope and spar on the ship was frosted white, making Endurance look like another species of sparkling white iceberg as it nosed its way through the pack. When the sun came out, icicles fell from the shrouds and shattered like glass on the decks below. Sometimes open leads of water in all directions were wreathed with wisps of frost smoke as the water began to freeze. And Shackleton commented that the effect resembled the smoke from a prairie fire. The weather was not improving, and the ice showed no signs of opening. On the next day, January 19th, the fist of the Antarctic closed around the ship. Endurance was surrounded by ice pack with no open water in sight. So those are some highlights from chapter 4. We're going to look at some of those photographs as well as we continue. So now that you've heard some of the good quotes from this chapter, let's take a look at some of our photos and vocab words. Remember how you wrote down the word incessant in your journal? If you said that incessant means ongoing, never ending, you would be correct. Write that definition down now. In addition to incessant, before we continue, mirage. The dangerous environment of Antarctica is captured by Armstrong's description of how the air forms mirages. He states that often crystalline air formed mirages and the sailors saw icebergs suspended upside down on the horizon. Write down the word mirage. Think about that quote and what you think it means. It made navigation very dangerous when they saw these mirages. If you said optical illusion, you are correct. Write that down as the definition in your journal next to mirage. And let's review one more. Obstinate. Shackleton describes the ice as obstinate, saying, "What we were encountering was a fairly dense pack of a very obstinate nature." Obstinate. What might that mean, and how does the word help to personify Antarctica? If you said stubborn, if you said stubborn or difficult, you're right. Obstinate is an adjective that means stubborn. Write that down in your journal now, and then we'll move on to the photos. I've been promising the photographs for a while, so let me slide out. And let's think about, how does this photo and text add to your understanding of the word mirage? Let me read this passage to you. The sun never set, and even when there was fog, it was never dark. Often the crystalline air formed mirages, and the sailors saw icebergs suspended upside down on the horizon. These mirages made navigation around the bergs very dangerous, because it was often hard to tell what was a real iceberg and what was a phantom. Knowing the difference was critical, especially since Endurance often passed more than 400 bergs in a 24-hour period. It was a crowded sea. So think about that, a crowded sea, crowded with the icebergs, all of these, ice as far as you could see. And when they were trying to navigate, imagine looking and seeing them almost turned upside down on the horizon as that ghostly image, and being challenging to tell what's real and what's not. Now let's take a look at this photo and caption to add to your understanding of the word obstinate. I'm going to read the caption out loud. Endurance began to pick its way through the ice December 9th, 1914. Shackleton wrote in his diary, "I had been prepared for evil conditions in the Weddell Sea, but had hoped that in December and January the pack would be loose, even if no open water was to be found. What we were encountering was a fairly dense pack of a very obstinate nature." How does that help your understanding of how stubborn and difficult the ice was being for the crew? Obstinate. Try as they might, it was challenging to move ahead. Okay, let's revisit some of the more powerful quotes from the text here. And I really want us to think about how the vocabulary and the language used really helps us visualize the hostility of the environment that they're living in right now. Armstrong describes Antarctica's ice as a fist that closes around the ship. Visualize that for a minute. Maybe close your eyes and picture the ship with your fist closing along the inside. Maybe you might want to take this time to open your journal and actually illustrate that. That would be a really fun thing to stop and draw. Maybe you would want to illustrate the Endurance being held captive. Hang on, let me get my marker out. In an icy prison. That's another really great thing to visualize. Icy prison with the Endurance in the middle of it. Feel free to pause the video here and draw that if you want to. And I'm going to be honest, I think that out of all the chapters we've read so far, this might be my favorite quote and one of my favorite things to visualize. An endless pack of ice that grinds against itself like a restless giant breaking mountains in its sleep. Have any of you ever listened to a fairy tale about a giant that just comes pushing and moving and taking out everything in its path? That's what this quote made me think of. It's an easy one for me to picture. They also say that the men felt like a rat in a trap. That will be another really great thing to visualize or to write down in your journal. Maybe draw the illustration of that. And then this one. The ice growls underneath a ship. That's another example of the personification. Can the ice really growl? Maybe if you don't want to draw, what you could do right now is take a minute and try to make the sound of the ice growling under the ship. Imagine how quiet it is out there for the whole crew, and all they hear is that noise of the ice growling underneath them. Those are some really great ideas and things to picture when we're thinking about the hostile environment that the crew is in right now. Okay, let me slip out for a second. We talked in the last lessons about how the text combined with the photographs and their captions work together to give us a sense of the harsh conditions and how the environment is depicted in Antarctica. We're about to examine a series of photographs that are found on pages 21 through 23 of the book. I want us to think about what does each photograph emphasize and how does this emphasis change from the first photo in the series to the third photo in the series. Now, handout 3A has the appropriate vocabulary for studying these artistic photos, and in this lesson in particular, we're going to be using the terms foreground and background in our study of what each photograph emphasizes and how the photograph changes from the first to the last. And before we move on, I also can't help but think how amazing it is that we have all of these authentic photographs from the expedition over 100 years ago to help us truly visualize what Endurance and our crew were experiencing. Ready? The two words in our art vocabulary today that we're going to be focusing on, foreground and background. And just in case you don't have your handout with you, we're going to go over the definitions briefly here together. Foreground, the area in a painting or photograph that seems closest to the viewer. And background, the area in a painting or photograph that seems farthest from the viewer. We talked about these terms before in some of the previous photographs that we've looked at. Take a moment to write each word in your journal and their definitions. Okay, let's start by looking at this photograph from page 21 of the text. Just like you've done in previous lessons, take a look at the foreground and the background of this image. What do you see in the foreground and in the background? So looking at the foreground, I see the men playing soccer. It looks like they're having a lot of fun. When I look at the background, I see the ship. It's in the distance and it doesn't take up much of the background. Nothing seems particularly dangerous in this image. Everyone looks like they're having fun. And even the caption states that this time on the ice is only a, quote, hold up until they can continue. At this point, the men believe they can and will move on. What can you say about this photo? Take a minute and think about what you notice and what we can tell about the foreground and the background. This image is the second in this series, and it's on page 22 of the text. It shows us a huge towering iceberg right here. It takes up the whole background of this photo. In fact, it's so big that the photo doesn't even include all of it because of its size. If you were to think of some adjectives that might describe this iceberg or the image, what might you say? Pause for a minute. Jot your ideas down. I would say, looking at this photo, I find the image very intimidating. And I really think it emphasizes how dangerous Antarctic waters can be. And we saw this photograph earlier in the lesson, but now I want you to look at it through the lens of foreground and background. This is the third photo in the series, and it shows a huge field. Hang on, let me get my drawing tool. It shows a huge field of hard, lumpy snow. It just takes up the entire background. It's ice and snow as far as the eye can see. What do you notice about the men in the foreground of this photo? Take a minute and jot your ideas down. Yes, they look small compared to the field of ice, and we can't see their faces. What else do you notice? What are all these right here? That's right, footprints. It looks like the men made loops trying to go out, but they all stop kind kind of in this place right here. It makes me wonder if they found it to be too impenetrable to go through. And I also noticed that the ship is nowhere in sight. So now let's take a look at all 3 photos in the series. Looking at the 3 of them together here in the order that they are, think about, what does each photograph emphasize? How does the emphasis change as the series ends? Take a minute, pause the video here, and imagine if you were one of the crew. What do these images make you feel? And this one, and this one. Pause here. For me, from reading the text and seeing the photographs in this series, it almost makes me feel a sense of foreboding, almost like the environment of the ice is closing in. Here the emphasis is on the men having fun, and you still see the ship out in the distance. But here, huge icebergs, huge forms of ice are sitting right next to you, almost like they're coming closer. And this one, the ship is no longer in sight, and all you see is ice and snow chunks as far as you can look. If I were the crew, I would think the environment was beginning to close in. So, with the passages that we've just reread and the selected quotes that combine with the photographs, what are the main ideas about Antarctica that Armstrong helps develop? Stop and jot your thoughts into your journal. If you have a family member or a friend near you, share your stop and jot responses with them. But if you're working alone, maybe stop and read your response out loud to yourself. Just like we've been practicing, I'm going to share a couple responses with you, but again, it's just for you to have something to compare it to. So pause the video here and get your response down to, what main ideas about Antarctica does Armstrong develop with the text and the photographs that we've been reading? Now I'll share some of my thoughts with you. I think that Armstrong builds on the idea of Antarctica as a hostile environment that is actively working against the men. It almost seems like Antarctica is a human and an enemy that was sent to destroy them. Antarctica really seems more powerful than the men at this point, and I think that it might win the fight. Before we move on, this would be a great time for you to go into your journal and reread your summary of Chapter 4 that you completed for homework. I really wish I could have you all read them out loud to me right now. But since we can't do that, pause the video and read yours out loud no matter where you are. If you have not yet taken the opportunity to write your summary for Chapter 4, this would be a good time for you to pause the video and do that before we move on. Okay. Did your summary include how the men responded to Antarctica's hostile environment after their ship is trapped by ice? The men kept to their routines. They certainly did. This was important. They found ways to entertain themselves. Did you include anything about the activities that they did? Some of them were pretty funny. And they made the best of things in the current circumstances. Everyone's trying to keep their chin up at this point, but by Chapter 5, the ice pack has closed around the Endurance. So now we know that the Endurance and her crew are getting closed in by the ice pack. Read this with me. Shackleton realizes that it is inevitable that the men will spend the winter trapped in the ice. Shackleton realizes that it is inevitable that the men will spend the winter trapped in the ice. Let's look at the word inevitable. What do you think it means? Take a minute, jot it into your notebook, and write down what you think. We know the ice has now moved in. We know that they're going to spend the winter trapped in the ice, and that it's inevitable. If you said that inevitable means something that will happen and cannot be avoided, you are correct. So pause for a minute and think about this. If the Endurance cannot avoid being trapped by the ice, what are Shackleton's new concerns? I'm going to reread part of page 26 for you. Listen and see if you can recognize what Shackleton's new concerns are and jot them down into your journal. Okay. Not that Shackleton had completely given up hope of escaping from the icy prison. The engines were kept stoked, and watches were set to scan the horizon for any open leads of water. If there was any chance of breaking free, the boss wanted to be ready for it, and he was burning half a ton of coal a day to keep the engines fired. But by March 16th, winter on the ice seemed inevitable. Shackleton ordered the fires to be burned down. The men all knew what that meant. They were stuck until the ice broke up in the spring. They were all confident that their Norwegian-built ship, with her thick hull, could withstand being locked in the ice. Shackleton's only serious concern at that point was that the ship would drift far off course with the moving ice pack, causing even more delay. There was nothing to do but make the best of it and pray they didn't die of sheer boredom. Imagine if you're the crew at this point and you've just been told we're spending the winter on the ice. How would you feel? And did you note what Shackleton's new concerns are? Pause here and write them down. They're worried that the ship is going to drift off course and that his expedition will be even more delayed. Okay. Before we wrap up, let's analyze one more series of photographs on pages 32 to 34 in the book. Pay particular attention to how Shackleton and his men continue to respond to the challenges posed by their hostile environment and how these responses affect the entire crew's well-beings. So remember, how do these photos help us see how the men respond to the hostile environment? This photo from page 32 shows Captain Worsley and Reginald James figuring out the ship's position by taking astronomical sights of the stars and the planets. Looking at this, how are the men responding to their hostile environment at this point? Yeah, they're working together. They're trying to get things accomplished. This photo from page 33 shows everyone laughing as crew members get their hair cut. We see the crew experiencing a shared happy moment. I love the looks on the men's faces in the photo. You can see that they're smiling, and they're all pretty amused, probably by how they all look after their hair is gone. What did you note that this photo captures? Do you think that the main idea is that one way that the men successfully deal with their bad luck is they just enjoy their time together? Something as simple as getting your hair cut, and it looks like they're having a good time with it. And this photograph on page 34, it shows the crew eating in an orderly manner. What do you notice about this photo? Let me get my drawing tool out here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my gosh, the space is really tight. This forces the men to sit really close together. But it looks like it's a routine that they're used to and that they're handling their cramped conditions pretty well. You guys are all rock stars. I am so proud of all the hard work that we've done throughout all of these lessons. Let's take this time to do a quick check for understanding. I want you to get everything that's in your head about this question out and into your journal. How do the men face their predicament or this difficult, dangerous situation? And how effective are their responses in dealing with a hostile environment? If you have one, why don't you set a timer for 4 to 6 minutes in order to write? If you don't have a timer, just notice the time on your clock or your computer. If you have the text, feel free to go back and reflect on all of those photographs and the images and the text within the book and the chapters. If you don't, that's okay. Review the notes that you've been jotting down in your journal. Think about our essential question here. How does the hostile environment of the Antarctic inspire heroism? Is that what we're seeing here? Or are they, Shackleton and the crew at this point, responding differently? It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Put that thought in your pocket, and we're going to talk about it again. But right now, you're going to pause the video. You're going to take anywhere from between 4 and 6 minutes and complete this quick write for me. Go ahead. Okay. I have some sample responses. And remember, our work together is building our knowledge and preparing us for the task that is coming up at the end of the module. So I just want to remind you that even though I'm going to share sample responses with you, it's really important that you are actively working to engage in this learning with me and not just waiting for me to share with you what I have. Here are some of the ideas. If you want to pause and add these to the ideas that you've already written in your quick write, you can do that. The men interact with one another. They have to get along if they're going to survive. Can you imagine if you were trapped all winter long in this very small space? You're going to have to get along or things are going to get really rough. Shackleton built unity by encouraging teamwork and friendship. We see some of the ways through their routines and specific roles that each crew member have that they are a team, and yet they're also interacting with each other and getting along. Shackleton recognizes the importance of building that unity, especially if they're going to be stuck there for a long time. That's maybe what makes a good leader. Okay. And that brings us to the end of Part 1, Lesson 4. You guys did a lot of great thinking and responding to Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World so far. We know that the author Armstrong relied on multiple sources to collect relevant information to tell us the story of what happened to the Endurance. So, with that being said, in Part 2 of this lesson, we're going to talk about the importance of finding and using credible sources in research. But before beginning Part 2 of this lesson, now is a great time for you to practice some fluency. Under this lesson video, you will find the link for Handout 2B. It is a great opportunity for you to practice your reading of sections of the text fluently. Have fun with this. I will see you in Part 2 of Lesson 4. Great job today, guys.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Miss Carlton, and today we are going to be working in the 7th grade reading packet. Okay, so please open up the 7th grade reading packet that looks like this. We are on page 15. We are working on Lesson 8, Part 3. Okay, I am going to read to you the text. While I'm reading, please go ahead and follow along on your own paper. In an uncontrollable fury, Glooskap screamed at the Wasis that he alone was the mightiest warrior. This time, the Wasis did respond. It opened its throat and let out a terrible, heartbroken wail. Glooskap covered his ears, but the creature's howl split his skull. He asked it to stop crying, but it would not. He danced a funny dance, sang a song, and made a face, but it wasn't until Glooskap held the Wasis that the creature was finally appeased. Subdued, the baby cooed goo at his father, for son and father they were. And forever after, when a baby coos goo goo at his father, the Wasis remembers his victory over glue-scap? All right, so underneath here, this question is asking us about summary. So this is a continuation of what we have been working on, okay, talking about what makes a good summary. And as a recap, a good summary is objective, so that means it includes no opinions. It includes information about characters and the setting, if the setting is relevant to the plot. And it includes 2 to 3 main plot points. So you're going to tell me 2 to 3 of the main things that happened in the story. So we need to make a list of important events that happened in our story. So one of the most important things that happened in this story is the wasis crying loudly. The reason that this is important is because it sets us up for the rest of the story. So I would make a note somewhere on your paper. Another important plot event in this passage is that glue-scap holds Wasis to calm him down. The reason this is important is because this is the resolution to the story. So for our important events, we have written, Wasis is crying loudly, and glue-scap holds Wasis to calm him down. Now, based on this list here, I would like you to independently take a moment to answer this question. Which of the following choices is the best summary of the story ending? Okay, so we are summarizing this passage that we have just read. I encourage you to use our list of important plot points from this passage. Just take a moment and circle the answer that you think is correct. All right, very nice. So if you circled B, go ahead and give yourself a big pat on the back. The reason that it is B is because it includes both of our plot points and no opinions. So B is the correct answer. Now, I'd like you to answer the question at the bottom of the page on your own. This is a show your thinking question that reads, explain why one other answer choice is not a good summary. So we've said that B is the best answer, but choose one of the other answer choices and explain why it's incorrect. Okay, you've done a wonderful job today. Great work, everybody.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Morning, everybody. I'm Miss Carlton, and today we are working on 7th grade reading. So please go ahead and open up your 7th grade reading packets. It should look just like this on the front cover. We are on page 16. We are doing lesson 16, working with analogies this morning. So please go ahead and get to the correct page if you are not there already. Now at the top there is a short introduction. I hope you've already looked at it, but I'm going to explain it to you just a little bit before we start our guided practice today. So analogies are just the types of relationships between words. So an analogy explains the relationship between words in a pair and between two pairs of words. So for example, this reads all together, near is to distant as hidden is to exposed. Okay, so you'll notice that although I said is to and as out loud, that's not actually written up here in our analogy. In its place are colons. So a singular colon stands for the phrase is to, and this double colon in the middle stands for the word as. So near is to distant, as hidden is to exposed. Okay? Something else that I'd like you to notice is that the words are broken down into two pairs. So pair 1 is near and distant, and pair 2 is hidden and exposed. So an analogy is exploring the relationship between the words within the pair and between the two pairs. So let's start breaking this down. Near and distant. Okay, so near versus far. those mean the opposite thing. That is called an antonym. So near and distant are antonyms. Let's look at hidden and exposed. Okay, something hidden versus something exposed to the world, those are also antonyms, correct? So we have two words that are antonyms. So what this is saying is that near is to distant. Near is an antonym of distant. In the same way, hidden is also an antonym of exposed. So this is what we would call an antonym type of analogy. Okay? There are several different types of analogies that I would like to show you. Okay? This is also on your paper, so please feel free to follow along on your paper. There's a synonym type of analogy, and this means that all of the words mean the same thing. An example of that would be friendly is to nice as rapid is to fast, right? Friendly and nice mean the same thing, and rapid and fast also mean the same thing. Now, an antonym analogy, that's the one we just did, right? So near is to distant as hidden is to exposed. Okay? Near and distant are opposites, and so are hidden and exposed. The next type of analogy is called the cause and effect analogy. Here's an example. Fire is to scorch as drought is to wither, right? Fire causes something to be scorched. In the same way, drought or lack of rain causes plants to wither and become dry. So the cause is followed by the effect in both cases. Part versus whole is our next type of analogy. Foot is to leg as leaf is to branch. So a foot is a smaller part of the body that is attached to the leg. In the same way, the leaf is a smaller part of the plant that is attached to the branch. Next up, we have item and category type of analogy. Horse is to animal as car is to vehicle, right? So the horse is an animal, and in the same way, a car is a vehicle. Finally, we have the tool and user type of analogy. Camera is to photographer as stove is to chef, right? The camera is a tool that a photographer would use. In the same way, a stove is a tool that a chef would use. Okay? So hopefully you've been able to understand the different types of analogies, their names, and you've seen some examples. Now we're going to look at the bottom of the page. That's labeled guided practice. And we have 4 practice problems that we are going to work through together. So what we need to do on this line is we need to finish the analogy. You'll notice at the bottom of your paper, underneath each analogy, we actually have 3 choices. They're in bold. Okay, so from the 3 choices, we need to pick which one makes the most sense to put on the line. Then, on your next line, we need to write what type of analogy it is. So, the first one reads, cent is to dollar as inch is to something. Okay, so the cent is actually part of a dollar, right? If you break a dollar down into smaller parts, you will end up with cents. In the same way, the inch is a smaller part of something, right? So is it a smaller part of a foot, a meter, or a worm? Hopefully you said foot. Okay, so this would read, cent is to dollar as inch is to foot. Now, when we're talking about breaking down something whole into its parts, that type of analogy is the part and whole analogy. So you would simply write part and whole on your second line. Now, the next one, saw is to carpenter as telescope is to blank. Okay, so our 3 choices are constellation, lens, or astronomer. So we first need to look at the relationship between saw and carpenter. The saw is a tool that the carpenter uses, correct? So the telescope is a tool that who uses? Based on our choices, that would be the astronomer. So on your line, you will write the word astronomer. Now, when we're talking about the tool that a certain profession uses, let's come back to our list. that would be the tool and user type of analogy. So on the line, you will just write tool and user. Okay, you're doing great. 2 more to go. Number 3, tragedy is to sorrow as triumph is to blank. So let's look at our options. Victory, hero, or pride. All right, so tragedy and sorrow. That means the same thing. That's, in both cases, that's referring to an instance of great sadness. So triumph is referring to a time when you're winning, right? When you have overcome something. So we need to find a word that is a synonym for triumph. From those choices, that would be victory. So on the line, you would simply write victory. Now, if we have a bunch of words that mean the same thing, what type of analogy would that be? Hopefully you said synonym analogy, and if you did, give yourself a big thumbs up. On the line, we're just going to write synonym. Okay, one last one. Eagle is to bird as shark is to what? Okay, so the relationship between eagle and bird, the eagle is a bird, correct? So the shark is what? Our options are tuna, ocean, or fish. So the shark isn't tuna and it isn't the ocean, meaning that shark must be fish. So if we're looking at an animal and the category that it falls into, what type of analogy would that be? If you said item in category, you are doing a great job. Go ahead and write that on the line. Okay, next up, you are going to be looking at page 17. Page 17 has 5 analogy questions, and you're going to do that on your own. But if you are confused, reach out to your language arts teacher. Best of luck.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Hi everybody, my name is Miss Carlton, and today we are working on our 7th grade reading packet. Looks like this, so if you're not with this packet, please go ahead and open up your 7th grade reading packet. We are on page 18, and we are working on lesson 8, part 4. So this is what your page should look like. If you're not already there, please take a moment to open up your 7th grade reading packet to page 18. Now, on page 18, there is a story called Beowulf and Grendel. I'm going to be reading that story to you. While I'm reading, please follow along yourself in your packets. Beowulf and Grendel by Javier Moreno. Long, long ago, there lived a great king named Hrothgar, who benevolently ruled over Denmark and its people. Every night, the king hosted great feasts in Heorot Hall and joined in the merriment as songs were sung and stories were told. Outside, lurking in the gloom, was a hideous monster named Grendel, who hated the merry sounds that came from the hall. The sounds of song and laughter tortured him. Finally, late one night when the unsuspecting guests lay sleeping, Grendel entered the hall and killed 30 of Hrothgar's men. For the 12 long years that followed, no songs or laughter came from Heorot Hall. Even the bravest and strongest of Hrothgar's soldiers were powerless against the wrath of Grendel. Finally, a hero appeared, Beowulf, who looked like a boy to Hrothgar's warriors. They gasped as he stood before the king of the Danes and declared, "I will kill this monster. I will leave behind my sword and I shall destroy him with my bare hands." The brave words of the youthful Beowulf filled King Hrothgar with hope. That night there was feasting and merriment in Heorot Hall once more. When darkness fell over the land and each man went to take his rest, Beowulf alone stayed watchful and vigilant, waiting for the battle he knew was sure to transpire. At last, Grendel entered Heorot Hall. Just as the monster was about to seize Beowulf, the youth caught Grendel by the arm, and man and monster wrestled until daylight. The battle was fierce and wild, but Beowulf emerged the victor. Fatally wounded, he reached the lake where he made his home. There he plunged into the water and quickly sank, never again to terrorize the Danes. All right, please make sure you keep this passage handy. Just set that next to you, and we are going to keep going on to page 19. Okay, but we do need the text, so keep that out. Now, on page 19, we're going to continue to answer questions about how to write a good summary. So, to recap, a good summary is objective. It does not include opinion. A good summary includes information about characters and about setting if the setting is relevant to the passage. A good summary includes 2 to 3 main plot points, so main events that happen in the story. Now, based on this list, let's go ahead and try to answer number 1 together. So the way that I like to do this is by using process of elimination. Okay, reading each of our possible answers and going through and eliminating things that would not be good fits for a quality summary. So question number 1 reads, which of the following statements would you most likely include in a summary of Beowulf and Grendel? A. Harrod Hall was once King Hrothgar's favorite place. Now, yes or no, would you include that in a quality summary? If you said no, you would be correct. Hopefully, your reasoning for that is because this is never directly stated. This is mostly something that we can infer from the text, and that would be a good inference, but that's not something that's very important. So I would say no, because it is never stated in the text, and it is unimportant. B. Grendel preferred to live in dark, gloomy places. Is this a sentence that you would include in a quality summary? If you said no, you're correct. Okay, and the reason for that is largely the same as A. While this would be a great inference that you could make from the text, this is not something that's necessarily a major plot point of the story. So we would not include this because it's unimportant, right? Grendel is an important character, but that fact about him is not really going to make the cut as one of the most important facts from the story. C. Hrothgar shows great weakness compared to the courageous Beowulf. Now, would you include this in a summary of Beowulf and Grendel? Hopefully you said no, but I think that this one is going to trip some people up, so let's talk about it. While you might be inclined to agree with this sentence, this is an opinion, right? Opinion words are great, weakness, and courageous. You're giving me your opinion that Hrothgar is weak and Beowulf is courageous. So we can't include that because it is not objective. Remember that a summary has to be objective and not include your opinion. Finally, D. Beowulf promises King Hrothgar that he will kill Grendel. Would you include this in a summary of Beowulf and Grendel? Hopefully you said yes, and not just because it's the last answer. The reason that we would include this is because this is a major plot moment, right? If Beowulf never promises King Hrothgar that he will kill Grendel, then Grendel never gets killed. The story never has a major plot point, right? So this is very important because it's one of our 2 to 3 main plot points. So, using this same method, please go ahead and answer number 2 on your own. Number 2 reads, which is the best summary of the last paragraph in the story? Now you'll do just the same thought process that I just modeled for you. However, this time you're only looking at paragraph 5, the final paragraph in the story. So please take a moment and go ahead and work on that independently. So finally, we are going to finish with number 3 on page 19. Number 3 reads, write a summary of the story Beowulf and Grendel in your own words. be sure to be objective and include at least 3 details about main characters, setting, and important events. So, while I'm not going to write this for you, I will help you brainstorm so that you can write this independently after you're done watching. So, I have 3 columns here: characters, setting, and events. We need to come up with some objective facts from the text about characters, setting, and events in the story Beowulf and Grendel. So, let's start with characters. Who are our 2 main characters? Hopefully, you said Beowulf and Grendel. That is the title. So, we have Beowulf. Okay, Beowulf is a young warrior, so we can make a note. We have Grendel, who is, of course, the what? Hopefully you said monster, or even better, antagonist. Okay, so we can make a note. And our final, most important character would be Hrothgar, the king. Okay, so now we have all of our characters mentioned. If I were you, I would make some sort of effort to include all of these characters in your summary. Let's move on to setting. Okay, so what country do they live in? Please have a look back at the story. It is in paragraph 1. We are looking for what country this story takes place in. Hopefully you said Denmark, and if you did, you would be correct. You could also make note of where specifically in Denmark this story takes place, and that would be Harrit Hall. Okay, so now if I were you, I would mention the setting somehow in your summary. Finally, we need to list 2 to 3 main events of the story. So let's go in order. What is the first main event that sets the scene for the rest of the story? Take a moment and go ahead and look back in your texts. Hopefully, you said that the first important thing that happens is that Grendelwolf attacks the hall and kills the men. I would agree. The reason that this is so important is because if Grendel never attacks Harrit Hall, Beowulf has no reason to have this mighty battle with him that we see in the climax of the story. So let's think about the next main event. Grendel has attacked the hall, and for 12 years, the men have been afraid and have been hiding from Grendel. So the next main event that happens is that Beowulf announces that he is going to come and defeat Grendel. Why is that important? Because if Beowulf never makes this proclamation, the story can't move forward, right? If Beowulf never comes to Harrit Hall and makes this announcement, this is just a depressing story about a bunch of guys who are scared of a monster. I would not read that. So, main event number 2 is that Beowulf announces his intentions. Okay? So now we have 2 major plot points. So after Beowulf announces that he will fight Grendel, what do you think logically might be your next main event of the story? If you said Beowulf's fight with Grendel, you would be correct and a logical thinker. So our third main event is the Beowulf versus Grendel fight. And of course, Beowulf comes out on top. So now that you have this list, these are all the components that you should be including in your objective summary. Remember, that summary should be objective and include no opinion. It should include information about characters and setting, and it should include 2 to 3 main plot points. So now, independently, you are going to use this information to answer question number 3. you are going to write a summary of Beowulf and Grendel on your own. However, if you get stuck, please reach out to your English teacher because they'd be more than happy to help. Best of luck.
You've been watching MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23, a free educational service provided by Circle City Broadcasting of Indianapolis. MyIPS airs weekday mornings from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. For more information, special announcements, and the weekly program schedule, go to wishtv.com. You can also follow us on Facebook.